6:30 p.m. on a Monday evening in West Tennessee. The sun has slipped low enough to cast the streets in fading light, the kind of dim where porch lights start flickering on one by one. At a modest house on Harpeth Drive in Jackson, a young mother walks up a front step for what should have been a routine custody pickup. She had made this drive before, she had dropped off her son before, and she had arguments before. But this evening, February 20th, 2023, she wouldn't make it back to her car. What happened in the span of a few seconds at this doorway would be reduced to just 6 lines in a sheriff's press release. 6 lines that mentioned a device, witnesses, and a death, but no arrest. Tonight, we read those 6 lines together and everything they leave unsaid. Because to this day, the case remains without charges, without resolution, and for one family, without justice. Her name was Tyeasha Starks. She was only 22 years old. By every measure, she had her life stretched ahead of her. Friends called her bright, funny, and ambitious. She graduated with honors from Haywood High in 2018, where she had been a cheerleader and involved in extracurriculars that bound her closely with classmates. She went on to Austin Peay State University, majoring in biology, and she dreamed of becoming a dentist. She was also a mother. Her baby boy was just 1 year old. To those who knew her, she was determined, juggling her studies with her responsibilities, trying to carve out a better life not only for herself, but for her son. And on that day in February, her role as a student and as a mother collided. She had dropped off her son earlier with the child's father, Bryce, as part of a custody arrangement. That was a Monday, one of the days Bryce was supposed to keep the baby. Tyeasha then made the 2-hour trip back to school in Clarksville. But later that day, she received a call that would change the course of everything. According to family accounts, Bryce told her he couldn't keep their child because he had class the next day. For Tyeasha, who had already sacrificed classes in the past because of her pregnancy, the thought of leaving her son hanging in uncertainty wasn't an option. There was back and forth. Bryce wanted her mother, Tara Harris, to pick up the child. But Tara was at work. Finally, Tyeasha herself agreed to make the drive back to Jackson, a 2-hour ride, again. And here's where the first cracks in the timeline begin to form. Friends say she picked up one companion on her way into Jackson, then another once she was in town. They were aware of tensions, and they didn't want her to walk into a hostile situation alone. One friend even handed her a stun gun, just in case. Another recorded video on a phone as she approached the house. Their version of events and the official version in the sheriff's release do not line up. According to the Madison County Sheriff's Office press release dated February 23, 2023, the disturbance at the home was related to a child custody issue. It states that witnesses corroborated that Miss Starks was armed with a stun device and was actively arcing the device when she was shot. That phrase, actively arcing, is precise. It suggests she was not only carrying the stun gun but triggering it, creating the visible spark that makes such devices crackle and flash. In the sheriff's telling, that moment was the precipitating threat, and what followed was gunfire. But her friends tell another story. They insist she never used the stun gun. They say she knocked on the door, there was a tense exchange of words, and she told the man at the door to shut up. According to them, he went back inside, retrieved a firearm, and then opened fire on her at close range. She staggered back toward her car, hit by multiple bullets, tried to drive away, but crashed into a mailbox just down the street. Within minutes, she was gone. 22 years old, a student, a mother, a life cut short, 2 stories, one official, reduced to 6 lines. One emotional, carried by friends and family who insist the official account leaves out the truth. Both can't be completely right. And this is where Tennessee law, the law known informally as Stand Your Ground, enters the story. Under Tennessee Code Annotated Para 3911-6111, A person who is lawfully present has no duty to retreat if they reasonably believe they are facing imminent danger of death or serious bodily injury. Deadly force can be used if they hold that reasonable belief. The law also carries a presumption of justification if force is used inside one's dwelling against an intruder. But, critically, there are limits. Those limits turn on where exactly the encounter takes place. Was the person inside the threshold? Outside the door? Was the door open or shut? Was the person retreating or advancing? These are the nuances that determine whether a shooting is justified under the statute. So let's lock in the verified timeline. Morning. Tyeasha drops off her son at Bryce's house, where he lives with his parents. Later in the day, she receives the call saying he can't keep the child. There's back and forth about who should pick up the baby. Eventually, she decides to return herself. Evening. She drives back to Jackson with friends, one friend recording video as she approaches the door, another handing her a stun gun. At approximately 6:30 p.m., she knocks on the door. An argument occurs. Within moments, shots are fired. Tyeasha staggers toward her car, attempts to drive, collides with a mailbox, and succumbs to her injuries. Deputies respond, the scene is processed, and by nightfall, one young mother's life is over. At this point, in most homicide cases, you might expect an arrest, but here, no arrest was made. The shooter was not charged. The sheriff's office indicated the case would be turned over to the district attorney. And that's where it sat. For the family, that was intolerable. They began to organize, to protest, to hold signs outside the DA's office. They wanted the person responsible to be arrested and prosecuted. They believed their daughter had been ambushed. They pointed to the phone call earlier in the day, the demand for her to come pick up the child, and the rapid escalation once she arrived. In their eyes, this was no self-defense. This was a setup. But the sheriff's office repeated its statement. Witnesses corroborated the claim that she was arcing a stun gun. They said the information was in the DA's hands, and the DA in turn said no charging decision had been made. That was February. That was March. By October of 2023, the same answer held. No decision. And as of October 2025, 2 years later, still no public announcement of charges. So here we are, suspended between two competing narratives. On one side, the official statement saying she was arcing a stun device when shot, and the case was under review. On the other side, her family, her friends, and community advocates saying she never threatened with the device, that she was ambushed, that she was gunned down while simply trying to retrieve her baby. What makes this story so difficult is not just the contradiction, it's the missing pieces. Where exactly were the individuals standing when the first shot was fired? Was the door open or closed? How many shots at what distance? What do the ballistics say about angle and trajectory? What do the 911 calls and CAD logs record about the first words spoken when the call came in? Was there body camera footage or dash cam footage from responding officers? These are the questions that remain unanswered. These are not speculations, they are factual voids, left empty because the documents and recordings have not been made public. And the absence of answers fuels the fire of suspicion. It leads one side to insist the shooting was justified and within the law, and the other to cry murder and cover up. For the family, the absence of an arrest feels like betrayal. For investigators, the absence of public information might simply reflect the cautious pace of a DA weighing whether the law supports prosecution. But for the public, all that remains visible are those 6 lines, frozen in time, unexpanded, unexplained. Meanwhile, the family's grief spilled into action. Protests outside the DA's office, marches with signs, chants of no justice, no peace. They demanded to speak with officials, demanded answers. At times they were met only with silence or with promises of future meetings. Even the mayor acknowledged he had no authority over the DA or the sheriff, but pledged to at least ask questions. For the family, every day without a charging decision was another day of injustice. There is also the matter of the child. The sheriff's office confirmed that the Department of Children's Services was notified. What exactly that referral entailed is not public and cannot be discussed without records. But what can be said is that the young boy, the 1-year-old, became the center of a tug-of-war between grieving maternal relatives and the paternal side of the family where the shooting occurred. At times, visits were cut off, then restored. At times, photographs surfaced of reunions between grandmother and grandson, celebrated as blessings after months of pain. The shadow of the case lingered over every interaction. At this stage, it is important to pause and say clearly what we will not do. We will not speculate about motive. We will not declare who is guilty or innocent. We will not repeat numbers or claims that are not documented in official sources, and we will not present allegations as fact. Because in cases like this, where the record is thin, what matters most is not how dramatic the story sounds, it's how reliable the receipts are. So what can we say with certainty? We can say that on February 20th, 2023, at approximately 6:30 p.m., deputies responded to a call on Harpeth Drive. They found 22-year-old Tyeasha Starks fatally wounded near her vehicle. We can say that the sheriff's office issued a press release 3 days later, on February 23rd, stating that she was armed with a stun device and was actively arcing it when she was shot during a child custody-related disturbance. We can say that no arrest was made at that time and the case was turned over to the district attorney. We can say that as of October 2023, the DA's office confirmed no decision on charges had been made. We can say that as of October 2025, 2 years later, no public update indicates that charges have been filed. And we can say that the family continues to believe this was a senseless killing and they continue to call for justice. Those are the facts that can be cited, shown, and verified. Everything else, the arguments on the porch, the alleged setup, the details of how many shots were fired, remain unresolved in the public record. And so we end where we began, at a doorway in Jackson, Tennessee, where a young mother came to retrieve her son and never came home. At a 6-line press release that tried to summarize her death. At a law that says you don't have to retreat if you reasonably fear for your life. And at a family who says that law has become a shield for injustice. If you have information, verifiable, documentable information about what happened on Harpeth Drive that night, the Madison County Sheriff's Office and the District Attorney's Office remain the channels to contact. Tyeasha Starks was a daughter, a mother, and a student. She was 22 years old. And tonight, we speak her name not only to recount what the record says, but to underline what the record does not. Until those blanks are filled with receipts, the questions will not end.